The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled under the magnificent crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across the gilded walls and reflecting off the polished marble floors. Tonight was the annual Commonwealth Charity Banquet, one of the most important events on the royal calendar. Distinguished guests from around the world had gathered to celebrate humanitarian efforts across the Commonwealth nations, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood near the ornate French windows overlooking the palace gardens, her emerald silk gown flowing gracefully around her, as she engaged in animated conversation with the Australian Prime Minister's wife. The dress, carefully selected by her styling team, complemented her sapphire engagement ring perfectly, and her hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased the diamond tiara she wore, a piece that had belonged to Princess Diana. Despite her poised exterior, Catherine felt an unusual heaviness in her chest. She had been experiencing what she thought were minor health issues over the past few weeks. Occasional dizziness, fatigue that seemed to linger despite adequate rest, and a persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right. Her personal physician had suggested it might be stress from the demanding royal schedule. But tonight the symptoms seemed more pronounced than usual. Prince William moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone born into royal duty. He was engaged in discussion with several Commonwealth representatives about upcoming environmental initiatives, his passion for conservation evident in every word he spoke. However, his eyes frequently found Catherine across the room, a habit developed over years of marriage and partnership in their royal duties. There was something about her posture tonight that concerned him, a subtle tension in her shoulders, a forced quality to her smile that he recognized after so many years together. The banquet hall gradually filled with the evening's 500 distinguished guests, foreign dignitaries, charity leaders, business executives, and celebrities who supported various Commonwealth causes mingled beneath the ornate ceiling frescoes. The room hummed, with conversations in multiple languages, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, and the soft strains of classical music performed by the Royal Philharmonic Quartet positioned near the grand staircase. Lord Pemberton, the evening's master of ceremonies, approached William with the evening's program. "Your Royal Highness, we're ready to begin the formal proceedings. The Archbishop will offer the blessing, followed by your speech about the Commonwealth's humanitarian achievements this year." William nodded, straightening his white tie and adjusting his ceremonial medals. "Thank you, Lord Pemberton. Has Catherine been briefed about the presentation of awards?" "Yes, Your Highness. Her Royal Highness will be presenting the Commonwealth Youth Achievement Awards after dinner, followed by the cultural performance from the Jamaican dance troupe." As the guests began moving toward their assigned tables, Catherine excused herself from her conversation and began walking across the expansive ballroom floor. The Persian carpets, normally a comfort beneath her heels, seemed to undulate slightly as she moved. She attributed the sensation to the weight of her gown and the long day of preparations, but each step felt increasingly unsteady. William caught sight of his wife making her way toward the head table and immediately noticed something amiss. Her normally confident stride seemed hesitant, and she paused twice, placing her hand briefly against her chest as if to steady herself. Their eyes met across the room, and he saw something that alarmed him, a glassy quality to her gaze that spoke of more than mere fatigue. The royal couple had developed an intricate system of silent communication over their years in the public eye, necessary for navigating the countless formal events that comprised their official duties. A raised eyebrow could signal the need for a quick exit from an uncomfortable conversation. A subtle hand gesture might indicate that security needed to be alerted to something unusual, and a particular smile meant that one of them needed support. Tonight, Catherine's expression sent William a clear message. Something was seriously wrong. Lady Margaret Thornfield, Catherine's lady-in-waiting, noticed the princess's distress from her position near the dessert table. She had served the royal family for 15 years, and had developed an almost maternal instinct for recognizing when any member of the family was unwell. Catherine's complexion had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality that was visible even through her expertly applied makeup. "Your Royal Highness." Lady Margaret approached discreetly. "Perhaps you'd like to freshen up before the formal proceedings begin?" Catherine appreciated the diplomatic suggestion, but she knew that leaving now would create unnecessary speculation among the guests, and potentially disrupt the evening's carefully planned schedule. Hundreds of people had traveled from around the world for this event, and significant charitable commitments were expected to be announced during the evening's program. "I'm quite all right, Lady Margaret," Catherine replied, though her voice lacked its usual steady confidence. "It's just the excitement of the evening." The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward to offer the traditional blessing, and the assembled guests fell into respectful silence. Catherine stood with her hand resting lightly on William's arm, a position that provided her with much-needed stability while maintaining the appearance of normal royal protocol. As the Archbishop's words echoed through the grand ballroom, Catherine found herself struggling to focus on the familiar prayers. The room seemed to be growing warmer despite the October evening's cool temperature, and she could feel perspiration gathering along her hairline beneath the tiara. The scent of the elaborate floral arrangements, white roses, orchids, and eucalyptus that had been flown in specially for the occasion, which had seemed pleasant earlier, now felt overwhelming and almost nauseating. William felt the increasing pressure of Catherine's grip on his arm and glanced down to see that her knuckles had gone white. During a pause in the blessing, he leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Catherine, we can step out for a moment." She shook her head almost imperceptibly, unwilling to cause any disruption to the sacred moment of prayer. The gesture, while admirable in its dedication to duty, proved to be a costly mistake. The blessing concluded, and the guests began moving toward their tables for the 7-course dinner that had been prepared by the palace's executive chef and his team of 23 culinary professionals. Each course had been designed to represent different Commonwealth nations, and the menu had been planned for months to accommodate the diverse dietary requirements and cultural preferences of the international guests. Catherine and William made their way to the head table, positioned on a raised platform that provided them with a view of the entire assembly. The table had been set with the finest royal china, the grand service commissioned by George IV, and crystal glasses that caught and refracted the chandelier light into tiny rainbows across the white damask tablecloth. As they took their seats, Catherine felt a wave of dizziness that was more intense than anything she had experienced earlier in the evening. The conversations around her seemed to fade into a distant buzz, and she found herself gripping the edge of the table to maintain her composure. Sir David Richardson, the British High Commissioner to Australia, was seated to Catherine's right, and had begun discussing his recent visit to a children's hospital in Sydney that was supported by one of her patronages. Under normal circumstances, Catherine would have been deeply engaged in such a conversation, asking detailed questions about the children's programs and the impact of the charitable funding. Instead, she found herself nodding at what she hoped were appropriate intervals, while struggling to process the words being spoken to her. The first course, a delicate soup featuring ingredients from Caribbean islands, was placed before her, but the aroma that should have been appetizing instead made her stomach turn unpleasantly. William, seated beside her, was engaged in his own conversation with the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, but his attention was divided. He noticed that Catherine hadn't touched her soup and that her responses to Sir David's questions were becoming increasingly brief and distracted. The evening's program called for William to deliver his speech between the third and fourth courses, and as that moment approached, he found himself faced with a difficult decision. He could see that Catherine was struggling, but he also knew that she would be mortified if he drew attention to her condition in such a public setting. The royal photographer, positioned discreetly at the side of the room, captured what would later become some of the most scrutinized images in recent royal history. In the photographs, Catherine appeared elegant and composed, but those who knew what to look for could see the subtle signs of distress. The way she held herself slightly forward, the tension in her shoulders, the forced quality of her smile. As William rose to deliver his speech, Catherine watched him with a mixture of pride and growing concern about her ability to maintain her composure for the remainder of the evening. His words about the Commonwealth's commitment to supporting vulnerable populations around the world resonated with her deeply, but she found herself struggling to follow the thread of his speech. The applause that followed William's remarks seemed to echo strangely in Catherine's ears, and she realized with growing alarm that the symptoms she had been experiencing were not subsiding but becoming more severe. The room felt as though it was slowly spinning, and she could feel her heart racing in an irregular pattern that frightened her. When William returned to his seat, Catherine leaned toward him and whispered, "William, I think I need to step out for a moment." Before he could respond, before she could excuse herself from the table, before anyone could react to the gravity of the situation that was unfolding, Catherine felt the world begin to tilt around her in a way that she knew meant she was about to lose consciousness entirely. The moment seemed to stretch endlessly, as Catherine's whispered words hung in the air between her and William. Around them, the banquet continued in its stately rhythm. Conversations flowing, crystal glasses being refilled. The gentle scraping of silver against fine china. The weight of maintaining royal composure in such a public setting had never felt heavier than it did in that instant. William's eyes searched Catherine's face, and what he saw there sent a chill through him despite the warmth of the crowded ballroom. Her skin had taken on a waxy pallor that her makeup could no longer conceal. And there was a distant quality to her gaze that spoke of someone fighting to maintain consciousness. Years of royal training had taught them both to smile through discomfort, to maintain dignity even in difficult circumstances, but this was clearly beyond normal protocol. "Of course," William replied quietly, already beginning to calculate how they could manage a discreet exit. "Lady Margaret can escort you to the—" But as he spoke, he watched Catherine's eyes lose focus completely. Her grip on his arm, which had been tight with tension moments before, suddenly went slack. The transformation happened so quickly that for a heartbeat, William found himself hoping that she had simply closed her eyes against a wave of fatigue. Then Catherine began to sway. The motion was slight at first, a gentle tilting that might have been mistaken for leaning closer to hear his words. But William recognized immediately what was happening. In the space of perhaps 3 seconds, he watched his wife's carefully maintained composure crumble as consciousness slipped away from her entirely. Time seemed to slow to an impossible crawl as Catherine's body began to fold forward. The emerald silk gown that had looked so elegant moments before suddenly seemed to flutter around her like water as gravity took hold. The diamond tiara, secured with what had seemed like absolute certainty by her hairdressing team, shifted slightly as her head tilted forward at an unnatural angle. William's response was instantaneous and born of pure instinct. His chair scraped sharply against the wooden platform as he pushed back from the table and spun toward his wife. The careful royal posture that had been drummed into him since childhood disappeared entirely, replaced by the urgent movements of a husband whose only concern was protecting the person he loved most in the world. His right arm shot out and wrapped around Catherine's waist, just as her body began to crumple completely. His left hand caught her shoulder, and he pulled her against his chest, cradling her head against his shoulder to prevent it from striking the table or falling backward. The motion was fluid and protective, executed with the kind of grace that comes only from absolute focus and determination. The tiara, which had remained in place through countless public appearances and formal events, finally succumbed to the disruption and slipped from Catherine's hair. It struck the edge of her dinner plate with a delicate crystalline sound, before coming to rest beside the untouched Caribbean soup, the diamonds catching the chandelier light even as they lay among the formal table setting. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the only sounds in William's immediate vicinity were Catherine's shallow, rapid breathing and the thundering of his own heartbeat in his ears. She was completely limp in his arms, her face peaceful but alarmingly pale against the deep blue of his formal jacket. The reaction from the surrounding guests was immediate but varied wildly depending on their proximity to the head table. Those seated closest, the Commonwealth officials, foreign dignitaries, and senior members of the royal household, recognized instantly that something serious had occurred. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, glasses were set down with unusual care, and chairs turned toward the royal table as the gravity of the situation became clear. Sir David Richardson, who had been speaking with Catherine moments before, rose from his seat so quickly that his own chair nearly toppled backward. "Your Royal Highness, shall I summon the palace physician?" William, still cradling Catherine's unconscious form, managed to nod while his mind raced through the implications of the situation. "Yes, immediately. And please ask them to bring a wheelchair or stretcher to the service entrance." Lady Margaret, who had been positioned near the wall in keeping with royal protocol, moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing royal emergencies. She produced a small radio device from somewhere within her formal gown and began speaking in low, urgent tones to the palace security and medical staff. The Archbishop of Canterbury, despite his advanced age, moved with surprising speed around the table to offer whatever assistance he could provide. His years of pastoral care had given him experience with medical emergencies, and he knelt beside William's chair to help support Catherine's weight while keeping her airway clear. "She's breathing well," the Archbishop observed quietly, his trained eyes assessing her condition. "Her pulse seems rapid but strong." At the far end of the ballroom, many guests remained completely unaware that anything unusual had occurred. The conversations, laughter, and gentle clink of dinnerware continued as normal, creating an almost surreal contrast to the crisis unfolding at the head table. The Royal Philharmonic Quartet, positioned near the grand staircase, continued their performance of Handel's water music, unaware that their elegant soundtrack was now accompanying one of the most serious royal medical emergencies in recent memory. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the palace's chief physician, had been attending the banquet as a guest, but was dressed in formal evening wear rather than medical attire. When Lady Margaret's urgent summons reached her table, she abandoned all royal protocol and pushed through the crowd with single-minded determination. Her high heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor as she navigated between tables of surprised guests. "Your Royal Highness, I'm here," Dr. Matthews announced as she reached the head table. She immediately began a visual assessment of Catherine's condition while maintaining the discretion necessary in such a public setting. "How long has she been unconscious?" "Perhaps 2 minutes," William replied, his voice steady despite the fear that was clearly visible in his eyes. "She mentioned feeling unwell just before it happened." Dr. Matthews nodded and discreetly checked Catherine's pulse at her wrist, while appearing to the distant observers to be simply leaning forward in conversation. "Her pulse is elevated but regular. Has she been experiencing any symptoms recently?" "She's been tired lately, more than usual," William answered, grateful to have someone with medical expertise taking charge of the situation. "Some dizziness over the past few weeks." The palace security team, led by Inspector James Crawford, had received Lady Margaret's alert and immediately began implementing the emergency protocols that had been developed for exactly such situations. 2 plainclothes security officers positioned themselves strategically around the head table, creating a discreet barrier between the royal family and the guests, while appearing to be simply standing in conversation. Additional security personnel began the delicate process of slowly and subtly encouraging guests at nearby tables to focus their attention elsewhere. This was accomplished through carefully choreographed conversations and strategic positioning rather than any obvious crowd control measures that might have created panic or drawn unwanted attention to the situation. The palace's medical team arrived within 4 minutes of Lady Margaret's initial alert, entering through the service corridor that connected directly to the main kitchen. They brought a lightweight stretcher designed specifically for discreet use during royal events, along with basic medical equipment concealed in cases that resembled formal luggage. Dr. Matthews continued her assessment while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation with William. Catherine's breathing had remained steady, and her color was beginning to improve slightly, though she remained unconscious. The physician's trained eyes noticed several concerning details: a slight tremor in Catherine's hands, the rapid pulse that hadn't slowed despite her unconscious state, and a particular pallor around her lips that suggested more than simple exhaustion. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Matthews said quietly, "I believe we should move the princess to a more private location for proper evaluation. She needs medical attention that we cannot provide here." William nodded without hesitation. His only concern was Catherine's well-being, and he trusted Dr. Matthews's judgment completely. "What do you need me to do?" The medical team had positioned their stretcher just behind a decorative screen that the palace staff had quickly erected near the service entrance to the ballroom. The screen, which appeared to be simply part of the evening's elegant decor, effectively concealed the medical equipment from the view of most guests. Inspector Crawford approached the head table with the measured steps of someone conducting routine business rather than managing an emergency. "Your Royal Highness, we're ready to escort you and the princess to the medical suite whenever you're prepared." As they prepared to move Catherine, William found himself facing a decision that would have significant implications for both the evening's event and public perception of the royal family's well-being. Leaving the banquet would certainly be noticed by the guests, and would likely generate immediate speculation and media attention. However, As he looked down at Catherine's peaceful but unconscious face, still cradled against his shoulder, there was no question about what mattered most. The Commonwealth charity banquet, important as it was, would continue. The charitable commitments would be honored, the diplomatic relationships would be maintained, and the royal duties would be fulfilled. But first, and most importantly, he needed to ensure that his wife received the medical care she needed. William carefully adjusted his grip on Catherine, preparing to lift her fully into his arms for the transfer to the medical stretcher. As he did so, she stirred slightly for the first time since losing consciousness, her eyelids fluttering in a way that suggested she might be beginning to regain awareness. "Catherine," he whispered, hope and concern mixing in his voice as he watched for any sign that she was returning to consciousness. Catherine's eyelids continued to flutter as consciousness slowly returned to her, the formal ballroom gradually coming back into focus through a haze of confusion and disorientation. The first thing she became aware of was the warmth of William's arms around her, the familiar scent of his cologne mixing with the more distant aromas of the formal dinner that was continuing somewhere beyond her immediate awareness. "William," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the relative quiet that had settled around the head table. Her hand moved instinctively to her forehead, searching for the tiara that was no longer there, and finding instead that her carefully styled hair had come partially undone during her collapse. "I'm here," William responded immediately, his voice thick with relief at seeing her conscious again. "You're all right. Dr. Matthews is here, and we're going to take you somewhere more comfortable." Catherine attempted to sit up straighter, her natural instincts demanding that she resume her royal composure and return to the evening's duties. However, the movement sent a fresh wave of dizziness through her, and she found herself grateful for William's steady support. "The banquet," she said weakly, her sense of duty overriding her physical discomfort. "The awards ceremony. The guests have traveled so far." Dr. Matthews, who had been monitoring Catherine's vital signs as discreetly as possible, leaned forward with the kind of gentle authority that comes from years of medical practice. "Your Royal Highness, your health is the priority right now. The ceremony can be managed without you this evening." As Catherine's awareness continued to return, she became increasingly conscious of the unusual quiet that surrounded their table. Though she couldn't see the full ballroom from her position against William's shoulder, she could sense that something had changed in the atmosphere of the evening. The normal sounds of a formal banquet, the gentle conversation, the soft clink of cutlery against china, the rustle of formal gowns, seemed muted and distant. Inspector Crawford had done his job well. Through careful coordination with the palace staff and strategic communication with key guests, he had managed to maintain the appearance of normalcy for most of the assembled crowd, while allowing the medical team to work effectively around the royal table. The Commonwealth officials and foreign dignitaries who were aware of the situation had been briefed quietly and asked to help maintain discretion. Lord Pemberton, the evening's master of ceremonies, faced a delicate challenge in managing the program's continuation, while the royal family dealt with their emergency. Drawing upon decades of experience managing formal royal events, he made the decision to slightly rearrange the evening's schedule, moving the cultural performance forward and extending the dinner service to provide more time for the situation to be resolved. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Matthews continued her assessment, "I'd like to move you to the Palace Medical Suite, where I can conduct a proper examination. Based on what I can observe here, I suspect you may be experiencing a significant drop in blood pressure, possibly combined with dehydration or blood sugar irregularities." Catherine nodded weakly, finally accepting that her condition was too serious to ignore for the sake of royal protocol. Will this become public immediately?" Inspector Crawford answered this concern with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years managing royal security and public relations. "We can transfer you discreetly through the service corridors, Your Royal Highness. The media representatives present this evening are in a separate section of the palace and will have no knowledge of the situation unless we choose to make a statement." The palace medical team had prepared the lightweight stretcher behind the decorative screen, but as Catherine regained more of her strength, Dr. Matthews determined that she might be able to walk to the medical suite with assistance if she felt stable enough to do so. "I think I can walk," Catherine said, though her voice still carried the uncertainty of someone whose body had just betrayed her in a very public setting. "I don't want to cause any more disruption than necessary." William helped her to sit up more fully in her chair, keeping one arm around her shoulders for stability while Dr. Matthews monitored her response to the change in position. Catherine's color was gradually returning to normal, though she still appeared fragile and tired in a way that went beyond the usual fatigue of royal duties. Lady Margaret had been coordinating with the palace staff to ensure that Catherine's personal items, her handbag, the tiara that had fallen, and her formal wrap, were collected and secured. She also discreetly communicated with Catherine's personal secretary to begin the process of reviewing her schedule for the coming days in case medical rest was required. As Catherine prepared to stand, she became more aware of the concerned faces surrounding her. The Archbishop of Canterbury offered her a gentle smile of encouragement, while Sir David Richardson and the other nearby guests maintained expressions of respectful concern. She realized that her collapse had not gone entirely unnoticed, and the thought of the potential media speculation that might follow made her feel almost as unwell as her physical symptoms had. "The press," she murmured to William, as he helped her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, but they supported her weight adequately with his assistance. "We'll handle that tomorrow," William replied firmly. "Right now, the only thing that matters is making sure you're all right." The journey from the head table to the service corridor required crossing only a small section of the ballroom, but it felt like an enormous distance to Catherine. Each step required concentration and effort, and she found herself leaning heavily on William's supporting arm, while trying to maintain at least some semblance of royal grace. Dr. Matthews walked slightly behind them, ready to provide immediate assistance if Catherine experienced another dizzy spell. The medical team followed at a discreet distance, their equipment cases appearing to any casual observer to be simply part of the palace staff's routine duties. As they passed behind the decorative screen and into the service corridor, Catherine felt a profound sense of relief at being out of public view. The corridor, with its simple white walls and practical lighting, felt almost luxurious in its privacy after the pressure of maintaining composure in the grand ballroom. The palace medical suite was located on the ground floor of the East Wing, designed specifically to handle any health emergencies that might arise during royal events. The suite contained modern diagnostic equipment, a comfortable examination room, and secure communication systems that would allow any necessary coordination with outside medical facilities. Dr. Matthews immediately began a more thorough examination once they arrived at the medical suite. Catherine's blood pressure was indeed significantly lower than normal, and her blood sugar levels showed signs of irregularity that suggested she had not been eating properly in recent days. The physician also noted signs of dehydration that had likely contributed to her collapse. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Matthews said as she completed her initial assessment, "I believe you're experiencing a combination of factors that led to this evening's incident. Your blood pressure has dropped considerably. You're showing signs of dehydration, and your blood sugar is irregular. Have you been eating regularly over the past few days?" Catherine considered the question carefully, reflecting on the intense schedule of royal duties that had filled the previous week. There had been morning engagements, afternoon meetings, evening events, and countless briefings and preparation sessions. Meals had often been rushed or skipped entirely when the schedule ran behind. "I suppose I haven't been as careful about that as I should have been," she admitted. "This week has been particularly busy with preparations for the banquet and several other engagements." William, who had been listening intently to Dr. Matthews's assessment, felt a familiar surge of protective concern for his wife. The demands of royal life could be overwhelming, and he knew how seriously Catherine took her responsibilities to the charities and causes she supported. "She's been working long days all week," William added. "Multiple engagements daily, plus evening preparation work for tonight's event." Dr. Matthews nodded understandingly. She had served as palace physician for 8 years and was well acquainted with the physical demands that royal duties could place on members of the family. "I'm going to start you on an IV to address the dehydration immediately, and I'd like to monitor you for several hours to ensure your blood pressure stabilizes." As the IV was being prepared, Catherine found herself reflecting on the evening's events and their potential implications. The Commonwealth charity banquet had been months in planning, with hundreds of guests traveling internationally to attend. The charitable organizations represented at the dinner relied on royal patronage and support for their continued work around the world. "Dr. Matthews," Catherine asked, "how long will I need to rest? I have several important engagements scheduled for tomorrow." The physician paused in her preparations to give Catherine a serious look. "Your Royal Highness, I'm going to strongly recommend that you clear your schedule for at least the next 3 days. Your body is telling you quite clearly that it needs rest and proper nutrition. Pushing through could result in another collapse, possibly in circumstances where medical assistance isn't immediately available." William reached for Catherine's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "She's right, Catherine. The engagements can be rescheduled or handled by other family members. Your health has to come first." As the IV began to provide Catherine with much-needed fluids and electrolytes, she gradually began to feel more like herself. The weakness and dizziness that had plagued her earlier in the evening started to subside, replaced by a growing awareness of how close she had come to a much more serious medical emergency. Inspector Crawford appeared in the medical suite doorway, waiting for permission to enter with an update on the situation in the ballroom. "Your Royal Highnesses, the banquet is proceeding smoothly. Lord Pemberton has managed the program adjustments beautifully, and most guests remain unaware that anything unusual has occurred." "What about the media representatives?" William asked, his concern for Catherine extending to protecting her from unnecessary scrutiny while she recovered. "The royal correspondents have not been informed of the incident," Inspector Crawford replied. "However, we should prepare a brief statement for tomorrow, in case any speculation arises from guests who witnessed the princess's departure from the banquet." Catherine, feeling stronger as the IV fluids took effect, turned to William with renewed concern about the evening's events. "The awards ceremony. Who will present the Commonwealth Youth Achievement Awards?" William smiled at his wife's persistent dedication to her royal duties, even while recovering from a medical emergency. "Prince Charles has graciously agreed to step in for that portion of the evening. The recipients will be honored properly, and the charitable commitments will all be fulfilled." Dr. Matthews continued her monitoring throughout the evening, checking Catherine's vital signs regularly and ensuring that her condition continued to improve. By midnight, Catherine's blood pressure had returned to nearly normal levels. Her color had improved significantly, and she reported feeling much more alert and stable. "I believe you can rest in your own quarters tonight," Dr. Matthews concluded. "But I want to see you again first thing in the morning for follow-up blood work. And I'm serious about the 3 days of rest. No public engagements, no official meetings, just proper meals, adequate sleep, and gentle activity." As they prepared to leave the medical suite, Catherine took William's arm once again. But this time, for companionship rather than physical support. The evening that had begun with such promise and had taken such a frightening turn was finally coming to a peaceful conclusion. "Thank you," Catherine said to Dr. Matthews, her voice now strong and clear, "for your care tonight, and for your honesty about what I need to do to recover properly." The walk back to their private apartments took them through the quiet palace corridors, past paintings of former monarchs, and through rooms that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Catherine found herself grateful beyond words for William's quick response earlier in the evening, for the excellent medical care she had received, and for the discretion of the palace staff who had handled such a delicate situation with perfect professionalism. As they reached their private quarters, Catherine realized that the evening's events, frightening as they had been, had reminded her of something important about the nature of royal service. While duty and dedication were essential, they could never be more important than health and family. The Commonwealth would continue to benefit from royal support, the charitable causes would continue to receive attention and funding, and the important work would carry on. But first, she needed to take care of herself so that she could continue serving others effectively for years to come. As William helped her out of the emerald gown and into comfortable clothes, Catherine made a silent promise to pay better attention to the signals her body was sending her, and to maintain the balance between royal duty and personal well-being that would allow her to serve with strength and vitality for decades to come.